So, we've talked about users and schemas and so on and so forth. This is how we create a user. So, we create user, we give him a username, and mandatory option is this identified option. In other words, you can't leave it out. You have to identify a user with a password. So, create user identified by password, in other words, type the password in. Identified externally means it uses a password that is passed through from the operating system, and globally as an external name. And this little quote is actually incorrect here. Let's go back. This quote here needs to be the same as that quote. Somewhere in the copying process that got left in there. This is the Oracle quote command to terminate string names. If you use something like this little quote here, see it's quite different to that one, you will get an error. So we'll leave that there so that you can see that. Just remember that. Single quote needs to be that particular font and that particular character. You'll have to find it on your keyboard. It is in different places sometimes. So, additionally to identifying by some kind of password, we also have things called default table spaces, temporary table spaces, and quotas. The default table space means that all objects that are created in that user or schema, same as the user, remember, if you create a table, it will by default get created in the default table space that you define. In the case of this particular command, I've created it in the data table space. Obviously, data has to exist. If you don't create something with the default table space clause in the create user command, everything will be created by default in the default table space, which is allocated to the database, which is allocated when the create user command is executed. Most databases, the default on installation is the users table space. In some older versions of Oracle, it may be something different, and they may change it in future. The temporary table space allows you to push large sorts from memory onto disk. That can also be altered. The default is generally called temp. It's a specially formatted table space that is specially formatted for sorting, reorganizing, ascending or descending order large chunks of data. That if you tried to sort it in memory, it would fill up the memory and push everything else out and slow down your database. This allows you to set quotas on specific table spaces. So in this case, we create the user concerts. We identified by the password concerts, the same password and username. This is a simple test database. I gave it a default table space of data to change it from users to data. And I set the temporary table space as temp, which I don't really need to do because that's the default anyway. And as we can see here, in this diagram, you can use the create database command in recent versions of Oracle to set the temporary table space default. Here is the sort space down here, which is temp. The metadata for the database itself is in the system table space typically, and more recently in recent versions of Oracle also in the sysaugs table space. The system table space is generally the core Oracle system metadata. In other words, the definitions for the tables. The tables that contain the definitions for table columns, fields, data types, etc., indexes, anything else you can think of, any database object. The data about the data, the metadata. Sysaugs is generally a secondary system table space that is used to store specific types of applications that are now internal to Oracle. So things like the data that's stored inside Oracle Enterprise Manager may be stored in sysaugs, although I'm not sure of that. I think you'll find that certain users in an Oracle database that are called underbar sys, SYS, will have their metadata stored in sysaugs. It's like an extension to system, but preventing any interference. Specific types of application internal to Oracle are split off now. They didn't used to be, and I would assume that the system table space got kind of overloaded. The tables and indexes are traditionally separated since they are both read concurrently. This is no longer the case as far as I'm concerned. Data and index, when you look at an explain plan for a query, the index will be read first and then the data space will be read second. You no longer have to do this separation for the purposes of performance because of the underlying RAID structure splitting out everything into small pieces in the I/O layer. You can, however, continue to do this to make things like your backups more efficient or more effective, or allow you to be able to write scripts to pull the table spaces out in sections. Again, it's not as necessary in modern day databases. But I still like to mention this kind of thing, that this is possible and it is traditional, because a lot of databases still do it, and a lot of off-the-shelf applications use Oracle databases that are a version behind, and they still do things like this because they're built like that, and you can't change things easily without messing up all your existing customers. This topic will be continued in the next movie.